What's up, everyone? This is your boy Gerk back, and today we have an awesome episode. We have this very special guest, Megan McQuary. I might have screwed that up. I'm sorry. I tend to do
You're
that.
good.
And then we always have the most amazing, beautiful Sonya Watkins to my right or your left.
Other way.
Right.
That's okay. I paused again. Sorry. Thanks.
No, you're fine. And so today we have Megan. She is an author of a book that's called Skills to Manage Triggers, Moving Beyond Traumatic Memories and Taking Back Your Life, which is set to be released in late 2022. So make sure to look out for that. And we'll just jump right into it. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Megan?
Hi, guys. I'm really grateful to be here today, too. I appreciate you guys inviting me to be on your show. So I'm a clinician, LCSW for anyone that's listening that's familiar with counselors. I have my own private practice right now, and then I also do a lot of speaking and training with other clinicians throughout the United States and even internationally lately, training them in specific modalities related to trauma and addiction.
Oh, nice. So do you work specifically, do you guys have people that work a lot with like rehabs and stuff like that? Or is it like not last chance, but like, you know, like they have no other options and they try to seek out different medical stuff? Or
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about what I was doing prior to where I'm at today. So I started an intensive outpatient program for substance abuse specifically in 2015 that I ended up selling about a year and a half ago because I started to just get kind of inundated with speaking requests and training requests. And so with that, we had a contract with like felony and federal probation. And so I ran a lot of the groups, did individual counseling. We did a lot of like case management, like linking them to other resources and supportive like sobriety activities and stuff that they could get involved in. And then after I sold that, now I just have like private practice. So the people that I see in addiction now are more like people that have already done some type of intensive outpatient program or that have like completed an intensive like inpatient stay. And they're kind of more in like a stable place of recovery a little bit. They're just looking for like ongoing kind of support. I do occasionally work with some people that are still kind of like in the early stages of recovery, that we're trying to get like more services or resources or might need more treatment.
okay. And the main practice you do is EMDR, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And so as reading the definition, it looked all Chinese to me. Why don't you give us a definition of what EMDR really is?
So EMDR is like a weird thing. So I think this is why we use the acronym EMDR, because it's about eye movements. If you look at the definition, you're probably like Gerk and like, what is this? It's weird. And that's totally what I thought in the beginning of learning about it as well. I'm like, none of my clients are going to come in and want to do eye movements. Like this is, this is like
hokey.
Yeah, like weird science thing. And so EMDR is a treatment modality that's used to work with people that have struggled with PTSD. I use it a lot actually for addiction stuff as well, because there's a lot of good like evidence and research for it. But it is one of the most researched and evidence-based treatments for trauma that there is worldwide, and it's backed by like the VA and the Department of Veterans Affairs and the World Health Organization. And it's truly amazing. I've seen it do tremendous things for people.
Oh, nice. So working as or I guess in your prior field, what made you kind of want to move into the new field of EMDR?
So I actually, my ex-husband was in recovery. And so recovery was a huge part of our lives. And we had done he was one of like a district liaison for AA at the time. And so we had done a lot of we were heavily involved in AA community and NA stuff as well. And we actually went to Memphis. We were doing a training together to get trained to do interventions. And every day before our intervention training, they did like a combined like AA and A meeting. And so everyone that was there were like people that were in recovery. And there was about a handful of guys. I was the only clinician there. But there were a handful of the guys in this training that had been in sobriety, and they all told me, they asked if I was certified in EMDR, and I was like, no, because I still thought it was weird at the time. And they told me how it literally saved their lives and propelled them forward to their recovery. And they were just so passionate about it that it gave me like a new lens to see through it. And then I ended up like researching more and then getting trained in it. And yeah, and here I am now.
So
how many years ago was that?
This was in 2015 as well. So
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
7 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I was doing research for EMDR, I'd seen a bunch of really amazing testimonies from PTSD patients that were, praising and stuff like that. But I also saw the kind of the researcher side where they're saying is very controversial and stuff like that. And I didn't really understand because it's all kind of still new to me. So understanding the controversy about it is kind of above my pay grade, I guess. So that's another question I would ask of why EMDR is controversial among researchers, and kind of get your perspective on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of controversy around it because it's outside of the norm of talk therapy. And I think that people in like the researcher field, or anyone that presents anything that kind of challenges the way that we should do things, it catches a lot of heat. And EMDR has always caught a lot of heat because it is so different. And a lot of people have said, oh yeah, it can be dangerous because you're working with like trauma memories. That's not an experience I've had. I think it's like anything, like if you don't know what you're doing and you suck as a clinician, then it's probably not effective. But if you're like sticking to the model, then it is. And so I think the controversy just kind of rises, I guess, from it being different than our traditional therapy that we're used to.
Right.
I think that's true, especially nowadays, even with just medicine, general medicine in general, because I have quite a few health issues of my own. And one day I just put out a bunch of medicine and realized I'm taking way too much medicine. So I'm going to do something about it. So I started researching all kinds of different Eastern medicine and different things that I could do. And you can't get very many medical doctors to really accept some of those things, and they don't want to talk to you about it. So
It's crazy. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I actually just seen a documentary not too long ago where there's like this, it's very taboo to talk about it with Western doctors, and they actually have multiple cases where physicians in the United States have been fired and gotten their license taken away just for simply trying to tell patients like about Eastern medicine and homeopathic remedies and stuff like that, because it's not in their guidelines, and it's not selling medications and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's like big pharma is it's got like
the good news is, in I have two sons that are doctors, and my oldest son especially he's not my oldest son. I keep saying that. I have an interesting thing. Anyway, Justin, my son that's a doctor, said that a couple years ago when I started changing medicines, he was so he called everything I did witchcraft and just teased me, like ruthlessly. And he's been in the medical field now for a long time, over 10 years, and for him. And just the other day I was talking to him about all this, and he was the one that said, you need to go to integrated doctor. And I'm like, well, what is that? And he explained to me what it was. And I think the good news is that the medical field has started to recognize slowly that they have to do it because people are rebelling, like me. Like I don't really care what a doctor tells me anymore. I try to do what they ask me to do if it's within reason of what's good for me. And I don't mind stopping what they do too. And so there, I know here in Arizona, one of the largest medical groups is Banner Medical, and they, no, it's the other one, Honor Health has just opened a new integrated department of their hospital, their whole medical system. And I've received a bazillion phone calls last week, like the yoga instructor, the dietitian, the herb person, and all these things that came from my medical doctor. So I know that they're trying to do it, but it's been taking a long time. And so maybe this EMDR is just easing its way in. But I was telling Gerk that I have met so many people through my new author, life. I hate to call myself an author until that's done, but so many people that have used this EMDR in their life, and I have yet to find somebody that said it was not useful. So I'm pretty impressed with that, because they're pretty good people.
Yeah. Well, and Gerk, one thing you might relate to, just from your own personal background or whatever, and one of the reasons that I ended up liking it so much was when I initially started our intensive outpatient, like our substance abuse program, I did it because I saw the limited resources and what I personally feel is like maltreatment by the way that we treat and shame addicts and anyone that struggles with substance abuse, and even felons. Like a lot of the felons that I've worked with, like they're like my guys. I love them, and I would rather hang out with them any day than like a group of soccer moms, because they get what life's about. But one of the things that I started to see when we were opening this that I wanted to be different about is most of the treatment centers at the time, it was all about treating the symptoms of the addiction, right? It's like, oh, we'll treat the symptoms. Well, when I started doing these groups, I was like, man, I've had guys that have been to prison like 4 or 5 times in here, and they could probably teach most of these skills courses better than I could. That's not what they need, right? And to me, it was about like the addiction wasn't the issue. I mean, it's causing issues in their life, but it's a symptom. It's a coping skill of what they've been forced and had to use because of whatever other shitty things have happened to them. And
Sure.
so I was like more passionate about like, they're not just an addict to me. I didn't want anyone, and I still don't, anyone that sees me like they're a human, and they get to be treated that way regardless of their felony status or their legal status or what their drugs they're pushing or using. And like when they come in, we're going to talk about real things. We're not just going to be like, oh, let's create like a sobriety plan. Like they've done that 5,000 times. Like they have bigger wounds that need to be healed. And so that's where like EMDR kind of got me excited, because I wanted to treat the things that would actually make a lasting difference, not just give them like this little green slip that they could go and get checked off at like AA and NA meetings, where they're not even really like, no one's really seeing them for what they've been through.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's super interesting too, especially with just how much judgment those people really get. And I mean, I see that on a daily basis, but I've just been so used to it and I'm so numb to it that it doesn't really matter. And honestly, like even going into something simple as a hospital, looking the way I look, I usually the first thing they're asking me is, okay, what kind of drugs are you on? Are you overdosing? Yep. And I'm like, yo, I mean, I've been sober for years. Like, I don't know why I'm here because my hand's broken. Like, what are you asking me about if I'm shooting something up? Like, so I just started going to, I started going to the hospitals in the nicer areas because it always just seemed like better treatments. And my sister, she's actually one of the head RNs in the cardiology department at Mayo Clinic in Northern Phoenix. And yeah, and it's just like the way people are treated it's just crazy.
Yeah. I actually had an experience with that. I had a client, and I should throw this out there too, because I get kind of a bad rap for this, but I'm not like the typical counselor. I don't think that like typical counseling necessarily is always the best. So if someone's on my caseload, like I'm a huge advocate for them, not just for the 60 minutes that I see them a week.
Right.
So I had a woman that was a really severe alcoholic, and our hospital here is pretty lousy with addicts, like undereducated, misinformed. Anytime they go in, we don't have detox here, so the closest detox is 3 hours away. And anytime they go into the hospital here, they just get treated like, you know, the bottom of the barrel. And so I went with her to the ER because we were trying to get her into inpatient, and so I needed them to take this seriously. And you know, she's having withdrawals from drinking like a gallon plus of straight vodka a day, and she's like writhing, and she's having all that, you know, anxiety, and just like she can't control it, like her body is genuinely going through withdrawals. And the doctor walks in and he says, why is she so anxious? Like she needs to chill out. He says this to me as her therapist. I'm like, she physically like cannot relax or chill out. Like her body is like seizing, and they were so just rude and inhumane to her. And I've seen this happen time and time again. And so a lot of the people that I've worked with here, like it's like last resort to go into like the hospital or somewhere like that because of how they get treated, which is heart-wrenching.
Well, it's actually kind of it's amazing to hear you say stuff like that too, because a lot of times people in these fields of counseling and drug interventions and stuff like that, it seems like they're in it more for, I don't want to say a selfish reason, but you get a lot of people that have the same backstory, like, oh, my son overdosed, or my husband, and you know, so on and so forth, but they do it to make themselves feel better instead of actually trying to help people and stuff like that. And you can see that a lot. And then a lot of times, you know, you'll get people that do what you do and advocate more than just the 60 minutes that you're sitting in a chair, and actually go above and beyond and trying to help people and stuff like that. And those are the people that I think that need to really be pushed to the forefront, because there's a lot of, I mean, I guess in medical field altogether, you know, a lot of people are just there for a paycheck. And it kind of shows through in the amount of just reading through your bio, just the amount of things that you've done, the amount of just work that you've put in, the hard work that you've put in throughout the years and stuff like that, even in this new field. And I think that's absolutely amazing.
It is. That's awesome.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you know, and I think that with that being said, like for those of us that aren't in it for the right reasons, especially, I mean, addiction work, it's hard work, you know, it's really challenging, especially from like a therapist point of view, you know, maybe not as intense as like with a family member, but you know, we measure a lot of our success based on how clients do. And so I think it can be wearing because there, you know, relapse occurs and there's things that happen, but you know, people know when you're not in it for genuine reasons, and there is no healing that's going to occur when you come in and you've got like some ulterior motive, especially in that population, right? Yeah. They see through the bullshit real fast.
Well, that's how I was just sitting here reminiscing about the amount of clinicians that saw Ronnie, and wasn't as much as you would have expected for as long as he suffered with it, because he was very private about it, very ashamed of it, very private about it. But after he passed away, I got to go through some of his stuff, and there was one person and all of that time that I didn't even know he had been seeing, that he must have thought really highly of her. And that was when he got the cleanest. And I contacted her, and she was just like you, just kind of like, she was very shocked that he passed away. And because I didn't contact her till a year later, and she didn't know that he had passed away. But looking back on it, Ronnie had a sense for that kind of stuff, because he would go in really wanting the help. And I helped him a few times find people, and he'd come out and he'd just look at me, that person's fucked, mom, or that person's, I don't want to talk to him. And it was more often than not. And interestingly enough, I was just like, what is wrong with you? These people are here to help you. But I'm
probably right more often than not.
Exactly. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Yeah. Because Ronnie did, I mean, he wasn't Gerk, and you know, he wasn't the atypical drugged out person all the time. He was very good at hiding it. And when he had problems, he'd disappear, you know, wouldn't share it with us and stuff like that. So but he did have a sense for people. He was really good at that. And I couldn't find anybody. The guy that, or the woman that this woman, I was assigned to him from a court thing. And it was his last probation that he was on. And he finished her whole program. And I don't think he'd ever finished any program before. And it was because he would just walk away if it was a waste of his time. And 90% of the time it was. And he had been in these kind of systems since he was 14 years old. And so, yeah, you have a really good point there that it's a waste of their time because they know that's not what they need. But they also don't know what they need.
Exactly.
And I don't know that there's been much out there that has helped. And so when I read your stuff, I'm like, and other things that are out there that are working and things that people are trying, I just think, I wish this was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that those, the amount of shit that those people see is really like trying for them, and the closest thing I can relate to is almost like teachers, like at first you want to, you have this, this bright thing about you, that you're in this profession and you want to help and this and that. And over the years and years and years of people just relapsing and nothing ever working, like I'm pretty sure, like that just wears and tears, and it's to the point where
cynicism, you build cynicism too. I had a friend that was a detective, and towards the end of his profession, in the beginning, he was in it for the right reasons. In the end, he's a bad cop. He is very cynical about what he did and what he saw every single day. And I did step back and I got it, I felt bad for him, but everybody's got their issues. I'm not judging, but it's just a really, a world where, I've been around addiction my whole life, and I'm 61 years old, and I'm just now seeing things that are promising, and my family's been inundated. I'm a crier, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's been a rough week because this has been brought up again, and Cherie was the girl's name, my cousin, and she's the last of a long line of people in my family that have really suffered from it. And I'm hoping that our future generations and my children don't have to go through this, because it's horrible. It's really horrible. Because they're good people, and they do get judged. Part of what Ronnie's, in the end, I don't want to talk about Ronnie, but in the end, that judgment is, he was responsible for what he did, but it was his panicked nature and what he had to look forward to because of people not wanting to give him jobs and that kind of thing. So it's terrible. So I commend you. I commend anybody that's doing anything that works. And it may not work on every person, but the ones that I've seen that have done it have really, really spoke highly of it. So I appreciate it.
So I kind of wanted to ask what, as far as the intake process, when you deal with a person with PTSD versus a person with a drug addiction issues, is your overall plan for getting them better? Does it differ between different people, or is it basically the same plan of attack and just trying to figure out where this pain is coming from and where the issues lie and go from there?
So I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel this, I'll tell you where I'm at and you can tell me if you agree with this or not, Gerk. So I'm a real strong believer that anyone that struggles with addiction has had trauma in their life. That trauma either underlies or comes into play within the addiction itself. I mean, usually it's both sometimes, right? It was there before, and then there's trauma that's there during, obviously, from like what takes place when addiction takes over. And so to me, I always think that trauma is one of the hallmark symptoms of addiction. And so to me, I think it's more not about what I'm always person-centered. So it differs for me with every single client. So what are they wanting to get out of this? Are they even wanting to address the trauma? Are they wanting to just work with the addiction? And so, I mean, and I think even second to that, like anyone to me that has true like PTSD, they typically have some type of compulsive or addictive behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean like substances, but it might be like shopping or like TV or eating or whatever it is. So to me, I always feel like you have to treat those kind of together. But I know different people feel different about those topics.
Well, I think, whether, even if I were to disagree, I think just statistics alone proving that, most drug addiction stems from trauma and stuff like that. And, and those are, I think that's always going to be one of the most underlying issues with drug addiction, because it's like you're trying to numb something and coming from, I've been a drug addict before, and I guess I say I am a drug addict, even though I'm clean and stuff like that. But that issue is always there in the back of my head. I know that I have that personal, that addictive personality. So I just need to I always try to refocus that part of my personality to doing something more constructive with my life and stuff like that. But just in general, yeah, I think trauma is always going to be one of the most underlying issues for a lot of problems that we have in this country.
Mm-hmm. I do too.
And opioid addiction and just drug addiction in general it's the biggest pandemic that we have going on in this country.
It is.
Do you have numbers, statistics on that, on a national level where we are at with that? I was going to look it up.
Yeah.
Statistics are one thing, but if I can throw a rock outside my window and hit someone that's messed up on drugs, that's an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that overdoses have been, it's been stagnantly increasing since, the pandemic. I think all of it continues to get worse. We're still at like the highest, I think, like opioid abuse rate that our nation's ever faced. So I think it's gotten worse and worse, especially with things like fentanyl and some of the other things that have really come forward in the last little bit too.
I know in Ron and John, Gerk's group of friends and stuff, I don't know how many you've lost in the last couple of years to overdose, but it seems like I've seen 2 or 3 just since Ronnie passed away that within your group of friends. And so it's terrible. My whole life, I rarely knew anybody that died, and especially young people like that. So it's sad. And
to be completely honest, I just got tired of posting friends that have passed away from drug overdose. I stopped posting it because it's just too much. So another question I had, Megan, is how do people in your line of work feel about things like medical marijuana for treating PTSD, or not necessarily PTSD, but for treating drug addictions and stuff like that? Because there's statistics out there showing that medical marijuana has actually lowered the rate of opioid addictions or overdoses in general, because now they're able to get medical marijuana and it helps them and it helps them come off. And I know I've talked to Sonya about this multiple times where, out of surgery, they're wanting to prescribe me pills and pills and pills, and I don't want to do it. You know what I mean? I don't want to go through that crazy cycle again of I know my pain's intense, but what else can I do? So I would just turn to marijuana, and it saved my life.
Yeah.
It saved mine too. I can't sleep at night. Since Ronnie passed away, I've had really bad problems with it, and they wanted to just give me pills, and I'm just like, I don't need pills. I just need to sleep. And it has been, I was telling Gerk before the show started that it has changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. And the other thing, I've talked to a physician that I'm dealing with is, and I was going to ask you about this, is because I'm kind of researching it, and I'm not even close to being done researching it. So I'm still in the infant stages of it, but mushrooms in relation to PTSD too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was actually one of them.
Oh yeah. Well, you should go to that one after this one. So, I think I stand in the middle with marijuana. there's so think for pain, I've just seen and read research where it's done amazing things for pain. I had a guy a couple of years ago that he was in his 60s and suffered from really bad like type 2 diabetes and some stuff with arthritis. And he never, I guess depending on who you ask, in my opinion, he wasn't abusing it, but it like significantly helped his pain. And he had less side effects than what he would have normally experienced from like painkillers and other things. And then my admin assistant, she went through stage 3 cancer and had to do real aggressive treatment. And she swears by marijuana, like helping her be able to get through chemo and radiation and some of the things that she did. So I think that there's some good benefits for it. I think it depends on the person and their history of like use, what their substances of choice are. One thing, I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they had a doctor on there, and he was talking about how they've been having adolescents come to the ER more frequently for side effects like of psychosis with marijuana. And he was talking about the potency of is it the actual THC? I think the potency of what they're making in the like these chemical strands of marijuana, they're starting to see that there can be some effects with that, and we're not still quite sure what all those are. But so I guess I'd say like that's one thing that I worry about with adolescents, just because they're not as developed yet. But I still think like different things work for different people, and that's one that I'm just kind of I'm in a gray area, I guess.
Right. Well, they have multiple studies going on too, where so definitely the potency of the THC affects people differently, but people that are under SSRI medications and have mental health issues and stuff like that, it affects them totally different.
Yeah.
And it's pretty crazy. But also with the medical marijuana thing too, my wife, Michelle, she's actually a 2-time cancer survivor. The first time she had ovarian cancer, the second time she had adrenal carcinoma. And
oh my gosh.
And that was the saving grace, you know, on a daily, day-to-day basis thing because she didn't want to eat, you know, so the chemo was, you know, it's just horrible the things that it does to people while you're on chemo, and marijuana definitely helped us get through the day-to-day life with that stuff like that. And just the studies with the Rick Simpson oil that's going on, massive doses of this Rick Simpson oil is actually making these cancers stop growing, and it's reducing them to the point where it's operable, or they can get to, you know, a quality of life and stuff like that.
Yeah, my assistant, she swears that it's what allowed her to have a quality of life while she was going through like her hardcore chemo and radiation treatment. And I've never seen, like, she never abused it or did any, you know, it was when it's used the way that it's intended to. I think that there's great benefits from that.
Now on to the mushrooms question.
Yeah, I like this one. Okay.
This is something that that I've done heavily research on, and I've actually. So my wife swears to me that she thinks that I have PTSD from, you know, years of gangbanging, getting shot at and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh, Gerk, are you in denial about your PTSD?
Well, that's a part of being Irish, you know, like we're always
yeah. He's like, damn it, I hate that you're on this podcast because you just talked about how everyone with addiction has trauma. And I can't let my wife listen to this episode.
She just proved it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was staying silent because I didn't want to like at him at all. I was just waiting for him to say something.
He's being so polite too. You should have been like, nah, not everyone has trauma.
I mean, so truthfully, I did deny it, you know what I mean? Because in the lifestyle that we've lived and being around gang members and graffiti, like we don't have time to sit there and talk about, the issues that we're having in our head. Like I gotta worry about walking to the next block, or what's going to happen tonight, or one of my friends getting shot, so now we got to go find this person, do this, do that,
And
whatever.
added, if you've been to prison, that's a sign of weakness. And my son had to push that weakness out of him, and he wouldn't talk about it. So
oh yeah, in the streets and prison and jail, like
yeah,
weakness will be killed,
yeah,
and that's the first thing that a lot of these people tend to prey on. So coming to terms with it, I've done research and stuff like that, but I'm not really a big doctor person. Not to say that there's nothing wrong with that, but if I can't figure out in my own head, and I think it's just coming from the background that I come with, like, then I might consider. But with PTSD, like I've noticed that, so I've done a lot of experimenting with psychedelic drugs and stuff like that. And I've noticed that there is like this bright light that comes, like clarity in your head and stuff like that, and what's going on with your issues and stuff like that. Because there's been times where if I hear a car door slam too loud, like I jump and I start looking for the next exit and stuff like that. And but I've noticed that just doing microdosing mushrooms on a weekly basis has cleared that up like amazingly. And so now that it's at a point in our medical realm where they're actually starting to accept this and see that the medical possibilities are really there, I think it's amazing, and it's definitely something that everyone should be exploring.
Mm-hmm. It's actually been legalized in other countries, especially Europe, for quite a while. One of the ones that I'm actually excited about, which sounds terrible, but is that I'm excited to work with, I think, and just see from reading the research and everything that they've done with it is, they've done a lot of research, not just with like microdosing with like mushrooms like you're talking about, but also with MDMA, where they combine actually clients like taking like small doses of MDMA, and then they do an EMDR session. So it's like I like the EMDR combined with this. And they've seen that the results of that have been like staggering. Like they get past traumatic experiences like almost 3 times faster. And so there's a lot of really good research that backs it up. And actually what's interesting is I don't know if you guys are familiar with a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
no.
Okay.
No.
It's like the #1 best-selling book on trauma, and it's written by, he's like this big wig influential doctor. He's amazing. His name's Bessel van der Kolk, and he is a huge advocate and proponent of things like microdosing and MDMA with and integrating like trauma treatments while that's like being medically monitored. And the research that he's put out like shows how healing it is, even on like a neurobiology, like to the brain, how it changes the brain after a session or two. So I'm like all for that stuff. I think it works and it's great. And I think it frees up like our protective mechanisms within us, where we want to like Gerk, be like, oh, I don't got trauma, I'm not going there. And you can't really do that when you're like microdosing, right? Like it takes all of that kind of away, and it goes right to what needs to be kind of dealt with or moved out of the way. And so it's kind of like a little backdoor approach to getting to the root of that.
Yeah, I think so. MDMA was originally, I can't remember the exact things, but they were in the 60s. They were using that to PTSD and originality, and then once they hit the streets and kind of became like this party drug, that's when the government decided, okay, well, we got to ban this right here, right now. There's also the same thing with there's a chemical called dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And there's an amazing book that's written by Dr. Rick Strassman he's done hundreds and hundreds, and this was all taking place in the 80s and the 90s, I believe, where he's doing hundreds of research with patients and stuff like that, like injecting them with DMT and kind of working through their issues and stuff like that. And I've also done my own research on that. And yeah.
And doing some of the microdosing, even though you don't have trauma. I'm glad that you're trying it out. So
Oh, no,
that's good. I do like that I'm teasing you about your trauma.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I mean, that's what that's what you do, right? Is you get to
Yeah.
the root trauma, right? So, um,
He
but
reminds me so
yeah,
much
I mean,
of Ronnie that way. You
right.
guys just don't. It's funny because even I and everything that I've been through in my life personally, it was after Ronnie had passed away that my son Justin looks at me and he's like, Mom, I just got through studying this stuff about, he was the one that talked to me about mushrooms right after Ronnie passed away. And he said, I wish that I could have talked to Ronnie about mushrooms. And I said, Ronnie already knew about mushrooms. I knew he was taking mushrooms like crazy and loved them, and Justin said, well, he was taking them. I'm like, yeah, but Ronnie, he's like doing it on his own. He's not really like, and Ronnie did everything big. So he took too many times, but too much. So anyway, to make a long story, Justin looked at me and he says, well, Mom, I'm all for it if it helped him with his PTSD. And that was the first time anybody had ever said Ronnie and PTSD. And I looked at him and said, what makes you think he had PTSD? This is how naive I was. And he said, Mom, like he'd been in prison twice, he just went through all this stuff. And I had always associated that with a military type thing. Always. I never even thought about men that had gone to prison or gang banging and seeing people being murdered and that kind of thing. And I thought and he even looked at me, he says, Mom, you probably have PTSD. And I was like, son, and he sat me down and talked to, and I have to really be honest with you. It was so infuriating to me that I didn't even because my whole way of dealing with Ronnie would have been totally different. Like I just I was so naive and so dumb. And then went into this full-blown research on, well, what went on in Ronnie's life. And I had to figure it all out. And I think I have, but wow. Like, I think there's a lot of moms. So talking to the soccer moms that might be listening or whatever, if your kid's going through something and you don't quite have it figured out, I would start thinking about that, because I think there's always kids that are going down a dark path without any clue why, or they weren't that way once, or your family life's not like that, or whatever it is. There's always something. I just have done too much since then, looking at friends, families that have talked to me and things, and there's always a story of trauma, always.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily anything to do with military or gang banging, or it could be some kind of abuse that somebody, it could be bullying, it could be a million different things. And it's real. And looking back on my life, I had to really sit back, and I was more like Gerk. Maybe it's the Irish thing, I don't know, but I went through some really horrible things as a kid. And I've always called it, and do it in my book too, I have had deep pockets that I just shoved and kept shoving. And just, I was the good person that didn't have these problems. I just kept shoving them. And Ronnie died, and those pockets just went, phew, everything came out. And I probably did have PTSD. I probably did. So for those listening that thought like me, don't think like that, because this world is full of a lot of secrets, and secrets are usually within kids and adolescents, that out of fear or embarrassment, shame, all kinds of things that cause those things to cause a lot of years of damage. So,
and to kind of touch on the statement you said about Ronnie with mushrooms, like he was actually the one that kind of, because beforehand when I wanted to take them, it was more of like a party situation, as taking fun and stuff like that. But he kind of opened up the door of like the self-exploratory, the medicine, and he, I mean, not to say that he would, sometimes he'd party and we'd all party, we'd take some mushrooms and have fun and stuff like that. But his main focus with that stuff was really like this finding yourself and this whole ritual. And he'd actually turned me on to the idea of, and now every time if I do take mushrooms on a larger dose or anything other than microdosing, what I do is I'll sit there and I'll turn all the lights off and I'll blindfold myself, and it forces you to kind of look inside, and you go through this incredible and amazing journey of finding, you know, underlying issues, or trying to help yourself. You know, like there's been many times where I didn't feel, how to put it, I didn't feel like, not adequate, but with my art and what I was doing with it and stuff like that, I just didn't feel like I was doing enough. And that stuff really like propelled me to become more focused and driven on getting my art out there and progressing and doing stuff like that. And there's just been so many times where I can attribute to just taking mushrooms on this inner journey of helping me get over certain things and stuff like that.
I do know that in the last few years that Ronnie was alive, in fact, after he died, Volar called me, Gerk, and wanted to sit down with me and talk to me about him and Volar were literally doing data in a notebook. Volar had it of some studying that they were trying to figure out, you know, what
Right.
on their own with their own buddies and their own issues. And it shocked me. Like I just really, the judgmental mommy that I was just always thought that, what is he doing mushrooms for, you know? And like Ronnie and Volar even said this. He's like, well, you know, Ronnie, he wouldn't stay on the track sometimes, and he'd do things bigger than usual. And so anyway, I didn't mean to get into that, but it's an interesting subject. And I have recently opened my mind to it and talked to a lot of people about it. And it's been suggested that I try it for some issues that I have. And I still have a little bit of fear, but I'm going to do some research and look into it. But I had a thought too on this EMDR. Can you give us kind of a example of how it kind of works? I mean, you talked about eye movement and that kind of thing, but how does it kind of work? Like, what does it do?
So the way that our brain stores trauma, like trauma is stored differently than our long and short-term memories. And so it kind of has like its own little like memory storage within our brain. So when we go through something traumatizing, it gets stored in this little kind of survival chamber in our brain. And so anytime something comes up, like a smell, a taste, a sound that resembles the trauma, our brain tells us, based on this past experience that we've had, that we're not safe. And so it shuts our whole system down. Well, in order for things like talk therapy to be able to work, we have to have all the different parts of our brain engaged. But if we're in a trauma response or we get triggered with trauma, we're only in this fight, flight, or freeze portion of our brain. So the logical part of our brain is actually shut off. So what they found through a lot of research and studies, and initially when the research started in the 80s of the developer of EMDR, Francine Shapiro, she was looking at what happens to the brain during sleep, particularly with the REM cycle. And we know with the REM cycle, the eyes move back and forth, but ultimately what it's doing is it's engaging both the right and left hemisphere of the brain. And it's getting the brain to be online and allowing the brain to process through the day's events and keep what's useful and get rid of what's not. But what happens is when we go through a traumatizing experience, whatever it is, if that's not sorted out, the brain stores it as kind of this like emergency store, and it interprets it as, if we experience any of the sensations related to this experience, so it doesn't have to be the same event, it can just be one of the senses related to it, like a sound, our brain interprets that as imminent danger or death. It could be the outcome. And so what EMDR does is it's able to get into the trauma memory stores, and it's able to bring those up and then allow the brain to naturally process through them while seeing that nothing dangerous is occurring. And so then those memories get to be moved from this trauma store to like our long-term or like maybe even a short-term memory, and then they're no longer causing disruptions for people on a day-to-day life. And if you look at brain scans, you can actually see the activity in a brain. You can even Google this. Like if you look at a brain scan prior to EMDR versus after an EMDR session, and you will see just the way that the brain is activated and the way that the nervous system is working. It changes like tenfold just in one session. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yes. Sorry, I know that's a lot of like.
No, it's exciting. Like I can see.
Babble. I'm like,
No, I love that because
okay.
I saw the excitement in your face too. And so
Yeah.
I am amazed at science and amazed at what I'd never say no to anything anymore. Like you really have to not look at things in a judgmental way in terms of, eye movement. Like that does sound really hokey, but in this world today, you just can't. You've got to open your mind to these things because we've been in, I don't even know how many centuries we've been in the same modality of methodologies, of medicine that has done nothing but make pharmaceutical companies really wealthy. And we have now, if you watch TV at any given time or listen to the radio or podcasts or all the pharmaceutical drugs that are out there for everything. And it's just scary that we could accept that a doctor can tell you that this medicine and all these side effects is okay to take into you, but something else a little more natural or a little different or a little treatment that's different isn't, because it just seems hokey. It blows me away that we were talking about cancer earlier, and if anybody knew the poison that is, that it's poison. It's like you can't even be in the room with the same person that's doing this in some cases, but to accept that maybe they want to use marijuana instead of that, or marijuana, that just cracks me up. But I was one of those people. We're like little sheep walking around, not opening up our minds to letting our own minds and our own research and our own, I call it the spirit within me, tell me whether it's right or wrong, for me. And don't worry about, Joe Smith over here. If it didn't work for him, that's okay. But for me, it works great, And so that's where I'm at with it. I've gotten really old and don't have a lot of years left to do that, but I'm proud that I got there, and I can thank Ronnie for that too. So thank you, Megan. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I guess my next question would be, I'd seen in your bio that you've done some work in India.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little about what you guys did over there?
I guess. This was pre-COVID when it was awesome.
Right.
So we could travel, right, with these. But I actually went and spoke at an addiction medicine summit there. And one of the things like within addiction that I have specialized in is the stigmas specifically with men related to trauma and addiction. And so I presented on that there at this international conference. And so that was pretty cool. I have a couple other ones coming up in Italy and Romania in the next 6 months. So
wow, you've really gotten your word out there. That's awesome. That is so awesome.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Do you see a big difference in patients according to like geographically? Like for instance, like in India, I'm sure that their traumas and PTSD and drug addictions are going to be completely 180 from what we're so used to over here.
Yeah, there's definitely cultural differences. I'll speak to that. But one thing that I think we're maybe a little bit naive to, I guess, is that one thing I found really fascinating when we were there is the similarities actually. I think that we're kind of ahead of the game in some ways being over here because we're more educated than some other places in the world. But one thing that I've seen, and if you look at research and data from this, that it really stands out to me is that the leading cause of death right now in the US, like the third, I'm going to talk about men for a minute just to kind of put this on like an understandable scope of the point I'm trying to get to. The third leading cause for death with men in the US is suicide. And the fifth leading cause of death worldwide for men is suicide. So that tells me that there's a lot of similarities. Well, if you break down those statistics more and you look at substance abuse rates or substances that were in their system at the time of death, it's pretty similar from in a US standpoint to like a worldwide standpoint. And so I think substance abuse is something that exists like worldwide. There's different things that are more acceptable in cultures or whatever. But I would say that when I was in India, it was interesting because there was a lot of naivety around like drinking and seeing drinking as being something that was a problem because it was more acceptable there. It was like common practice. But if you were doing anything else, you were like the scum of the earth. And especially if you were a female that had any kind of substance abuse issue, especially if you even drank too much, like that was like just not even tolerated. You would be like kicked out of homes, not, you were like just shunned from the community. And so it was really interesting to see those things. But I think, worldwide though, there's still, I think addiction affects everyone. And I've seen that from the places we've gone, it just shows up different.
Right. Okay. So you had mentioned that you're going to be going to Italy and Romania coming up pretty soon. What are you working on currently?
So yeah, I'll be going there to do some trainings on EMDR. For the one in Italy in particular, I'm going to train for them several times. It's their Institute of Psychology over there. And then Romania, I'm doing some things with a training institute for them as well on EMDR. And then I've just got a bunch of trainings coming up. Another book that I'm working on related to EMDR as well, that I'll hopefully get out in the next year if I have time. And then we've got an intensive trauma retreat that we're doing in May of this year in San Diego for people who want to come and like work on their trauma and, whatever.
I'm a little bit interested in that one.
Yeah.
Is that the one Bob Goff is?
Yes, we have Bob Goff is, it's actually at his retreat center that he has, and he's speaking for us. And I love him. I'm a huge fan of him. Not everyone knows who he is, but he's an amazing,
he's awesome
guy. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But that's pretty much it. Just trying to get.
How do we find out information on those things?
On my website, thementalsurvivalist.com, there's some resources for that. There's also some resources for some self-help courses that I'll have coming out in the next few months as well. One specific to addiction, and then there's another one that will be just specific to trauma. So you can find all that information on my website.
Awesome. And you said thementalsurvivalist.com?
Yeah.
Awesome. Sonya, you have any more questions?
I was just going to ask you if you had the opportunity, like right now, to say anything to anybody out there that's suffering from PTSD, addiction, alcoholism, all the things that you deal with, what would you like to say to them? What would you say to them?
No, this is what I would say for any of you that are listening that are in a bad spot, that are struggling and feel like the battle will never end and like there's no hope left for you. There is always life left. And I don't know what you've been told about who you are, but you're worth so much more than you know or realize. And I'm sorry that you haven't been told what your worth and value is. Find the people that believe in you, that can help you get out of wherever you're at, and know that change is possible. And it's always there. There's never a point where you've gone too far, that there's always hope and there's always change and always life left.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So for people that want to look into this kind of treatment, and even if it's, if they're completely out of your area and just want to look into this in general, what would their kind of plan of attack be? Would it just be, because I'm sure doctors are not going to, if he goes to a PCP or something, the doctor's not going to suggest doing this first thing. So how would someone go about researching and finding a physician in their area that can help them with this treatment?
You can even just start with Googling EMDR. Another big one that will show you EMDR clinicians and therapists in your region it's called EMDRIA. So it's emdria.org. They have a find a therapist registry on there by state, and it will even show like if they just specialize in trauma or addiction. So I recommend starting there. And that's like the largest group of EMDR clinicians that there is right now throughout the US. And so that would be a good place to start.
Is it generally covered by insurance?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is 100%.
Awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate everything. You shed a lot of light on a lot of things during this episode, and we definitely appreciate you coming on here. I think it's been quite an experience for both of us, just learning about this treatment and everything. And you're obviously super amazing and fun to talk to. And so we definitely look forward to maybe having a conversation again and seeing where you're at in maybe 6 months or something when you're back from your.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up with you guys again. I also, though, at the next one, I want to hear about Sonya microdosing with you. So
Maybe
maybe
we'll have a little party.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just newly kind of been introduced to me by my integrated med. No, don't, it's fine. It's not a big deal. I just, I probably am a little bit, like I said, like Gerk and Ronnie, where I've hidden things so many years that now I think because I've written a book and I've talked about all of it that I'm okay, but obviously I'm not sometimes, so.
That's okay. It's okay to not be okay sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, we thank you for coming on. Sonya, you have anything you want to say or?
No, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate, this is one of my favorite episodes we've done, and I appreciate it because Gerk and I just have really talked a lot in the past about what we can do to help. And this is part of my, trying to figure that out. And if there's any, if you can just keep me in the back, me and Gerk are in the back of your mind as to, we just haven't figured out that organization or that group or what we want to do, but we both know that we want to do something for the future. So if you can think of something, I'm open. I've done nonprofit work as a executive director of a nonprofit organization. So I get that kind of work, and this is where I want to put the rest of my life in helping. So
you guys should talk to Bridget about her Shiro's program, and you in particular, Gerk, because I know they're getting ready to start doing some stuff with men. They asked her to come up with a men's program for men in prison. I could see you guys doing that, but I will. And I hope I could maybe refer a couple people that I would think would be good connections for you guys. I don't know if that would be okay as well.
In terms of other podcast shows?
Yeah. People that could be good connections. I love what you guys are trying to do and the way that you've partnered together. This is what I want to see happen all over the place. And so,
more.
Yeah, I think it's so cool. And I really admire it a lot that you guys are taking this on together and having real conversations about this.
Thank you. I think that on my end of it, Gerk and I have talked about this a lot, that there's probably more education needed in my end of the area, with moms that just don't understand. And so I'm really trying hard to get that to people listen to my podcast, our podcast, because it's eye-opening, and I don't want anybody else to have to lose a child to get it. Like
Well, it's not just education on your part. There's always an education need on both parts too, because we don't, as an addict, we don't realize what we're doing to the people we love and care about until it's too late, or until you get, until it's happening to you,
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest issues with, drug addicts, or the fact that, sometimes the pain's just so much where they don't care how everyone else feels. They just won't
Right.
stop what's going on with them. And, you know, I think just both parts, you know, there's always education needed on both sides.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome.
I really appreciate you, Megan, a lot. And I'm going to look into the thing in San Diego.
You should, I would love that. Yeah.
I would love to go and just see what you guys are doing. And
Mhm. I would love that
isn't
too.
she speaking there too?
Yeah, she's gonna
Right,
come
yeah.
in and do something for us a few hours one of the nights. So I'm excited for that.
That's cool. Okay, good.
Yeah, and I'll link you guys up with a couple other people that would be good for you guys to have, or even just like network with a little bit.
That sounds great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for the help.
And if you send me a link, I'll put a link on all my stuff so that people can find your podcast too.
Okay, we'll get it edited
Okay.
and get it sent out.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you so
Hey,
much.
thanks you guys. It was nice to meet you both.
Did you not get to say something like, was there something that you missed, or I didn't even ask you? I usually ask that too, and I forgot.
I'm
Okay,
good.
okay, you're good. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, bye.
Have a good night. Bye.